Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're tackling a really significant and, let's be clear, incredibly sensitive document. It's a 72-page legal analysis from a UN body, the Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories and Israel. This is obviously difficult stuff, and our aim here isn't to retread headlines, but really to impartially unpack the core legal arguments, the evidence they cite, and also the direct responses. We want you to understand the mechanics of this specific charge from both sides presented in the source material.
That's exactly right. And it is significant. This report represents, well, probably the strongest finding we've seen from any UN-linked body on Gaza so far, specifically accusing Israel of committing genocide. So, yeah, we're going to look closely at how they constructed that legal case, especially around proving intent, which is, the highest bar in international law.
Okay, right. Let's clarify the source first, because that's important context for you listening. While this commission sounds very official, it's not, say, the UN Security Council speaking directly, is it? It's more like a high-level independent investigation reporting up to the UN system.
Precisely. It was set up by the UN Human Rights Council. The three experts are independent, highly respected, yes, but they don't officially speak for the UN as a whole. Their finding is a legal conclusion based on the evidence they gathered. It's not a political declaration from the UN itself.
Got it. And the core accusation, the absolute center of this, is that Israel is conducting its offensive with the, let me get the exact wording, intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, which is word for word the definition of genocide from the 1948 UN Convention.
That's the definition, yes. That's the legal standard they had to meet. And we have to remember the context the report itself provides. The Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, 1,200 killed, 251 taken hostage. And the subsequent war in Gaza, which, according to figures cited in the report, has resulted in upwards of 64,000 deaths and over 160,000 injuries, mostly civilians.
The sheer scale is hard to grasp. That's the backdrop. So what was the immediate official reaction from Israel to this accusation?
It was immediate and unequivocal, total rejection. Israel's ambassador to the UN reportedly called the report scandalous and fake, accused the authors of being Hamas proxies. Israel flatly denies the genocide charge, stating its actions fall under its right to self-defense.
Okay, so starkly opposing views. This brings us back to the legal side. Yeah. Proving intent is key, as you said, but the convention also requires proving specific acts. There are 5 listed. What did the commission find regarding these acts? Did they claim one occurred, or?
This is where the report gets really striking in its scope. The commission didn't just find evidence for one act. They concluded that the evidence supports accusations of Israel committing 4 out of the 5 specific acts listed in the Genocide Convention. 4.
4 out of 5. Wow. Okay, that's a major part of their claim then.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that evidence. Where did they get their information from?
It seems quite broad. Interviews with victims, witnesses, doctors, verified open-source material like videos and documents, media reports, NGO findings, and even satellite imagery analysis. A whole range of sources.
Right. So let's start with category 1.
Yeah.
Killing. It sounds obvious, but legally, how do they argue that the deaths amount to evidence of genocide rather than, say, tragic consequences of intense warfare?
They focus on a few things. Statistics, for one. The report cites data, for instance, that as of mid-2025, 46% of Palestinians killed in Gaza were women and children. They also pointed to reporting, apparently based on Israeli intelligence leaks, suggesting something like 83% of those killed were civilians. High civilian numbers.
And beyond the numbers.
The means of warfare. The report really emphasizes the use of heavy, unguided munitions with a wide margin of error. Using those in densely populated residential areas, it notes the sheer quantity of bombs used is extraordinary compared to other recent conflicts.
Okay, so the type of weapons and the scale of their use. But how does that translate to intent in their argument? Couldn't that still be argued as military necessity in tough urban combat?
The commission counters that by looking at targeting patterns. They documented attacks hitting homes, hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, designated safe zones, even people attempting to evacuate along supposedly safe corridors. They also specifically mention the targeting of protected individuals, journalists, medics, aid workers. They argue the consistency of these patterns goes beyond accidental harm or collateral damage. It suggests to them an intentional pattern.
The report uses specific examples too, doesn't it? Anecdotes to illustrate the point.
Yes, it does. For example, it mentions an incident in January 2024 where 5 children were killed near a petrol station, and another allegation where security forces apparently fired on an ambulance trying to reach victims. But there's also this concept of indirect victims. An obstetrician is quoted talking about pregnant women dying due to the lack of proper medical care. He called them indirect victims of war.
That idea, deaths from systemic collapse caused by the conflict, seems to connect directly to the second category they cite,
Yeah.
causing serious bodily or mental harm.
Exactly. It broadens the lens beyond just immediate killing. Here, the Commission pointed to two main things. First, reports of mistreatment of Palestinian detainees by Israeli forces. And second, the immense impact of mass displacement, forcing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, to flee their homes, live in dire conditions. They argue this causes serious and irreparable physical and mental harm. It's not just physical injury, but deep psychological trauma, too.
Okay, so we have killing and serious bodily or mental harm. The Commission's argument builds. What's the next step? Category 3 seems to be about systemic destruction. Deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to bring about physical destruction. Again, the challenge here must be proving it was calculated destruction versus just the result of heavy fighting in a built-up area like Gaza.
Right, that's the legal nuance. Their argument rests on the nature and scope of what was destroyed. The report paints a picture of Gaza being rendered virtually uninhabitable. They list the destruction of essential things, huge numbers of bakeries, schools, universities, cultural sites, religious landmarks, things a society needs to function, to exist as a group.
And critically, the healthcare system collapse and the resulting food crisis.
Absolutely central to this category, the attacks on hospitals leading to the system's breakdown. And the report explicitly references the declaration of famine in parts of Gaza by UN-backed monitors. The Commission's conclusion here is stark. They argue that Israeli authorities knew these actions. The military operations, the total siege, destroying homes and hospitals would inevitably lead to the physical destruction of Palestinians. They state authorities knowingly and deliberately inflicted such conditions. That's the core of the calculated argument.
This leads us to the fourth category they accuse Israel of, and this one seems very specific to the legal definition of genocide, imposing measures intended to prevent births.
Yes, this is a very focused part of the charge, directly targeting a specific clause in the convention. The Commission seems to base this mainly on two elements. One is the high proportion of children among the casualties targeting the group's future generation, essentially. And the second is a very specific, targeted attack.
Not just general destruction, but something specific related to births.
That's right, an attack on a fertility clinic. The report details the December 2023 strike against the Al-Basma IVF clinic, apparently Gaza's largest. It reportedly destroyed thousands of embryos, around 4,000 plus about 1,000 sperm samples and unfertilized eggs.
Wow. Targeting an IVF clinic. That's incredibly specific evidence to use for this particular charge.
It is. And the Commission connects the dots. They see the pattern of killing children combined with this specific act as evidence of a strategy aimed at destroying the biological continuity and future existence of the Palestinian group in Gaza. Their conclusion on this point was that it's reasonable to conclude that the forces involved knew what the clinic was and intended to destroy the reproductive material inside.
That detail feels almost tailor-made to meet that specific legal requirement for preventing births within the group.
It certainly provides very concrete evidence for that particular, very specific genocidal act, yes. So that covers the 4 acts the Commission claims occurred: killing, causing serious harm, deliberately creating destructive conditions, and preventing births. But as we said at the start, none of this legally amounts to genocide without the final, crucial element.
Intent, the mens rea, proving the specific intention to destroy the group. And this is notoriously difficult in international law, right? Unless you find a written order saying, destroy them all.
Exactly. It's almost always the biggest hurdle. Circumstantial evidence is usually all you have. But here, the Commission claims they found more than just circumstantial evidence. They argue they found direct evidence of genocidal intent.
Direct evidence. How? Through what?
Through public statements made by senior Israeli officials. They argue these statements weren't just, wartime rhetoric, but actually constituted direct incitement or showed explicit intent behind the military actions.
Okay, which officials did they name? And what specific kinds of statements are we talking about?
They named several. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is cited, particularly for a letter from November 2023. The Commission interpreted his biblical references in that letter as framing the Gaza operation as a kind of holy war of total annihilation. President Isaac Herzog and the former defense minister Yoav Gallant were also named. The commission pointed to statements they made early on that seemed to blur the lines between combatants and civilians, suggesting a kind of collective responsibility for the entire population in Gaza.
So the commission is taking these statements, linking them to the 4 categories of actions they documented on the ground, and concluding what exactly? What's the final legal finding?
Navi Pillay, she's a former high court judge and the chair of the commission, she summed it up. She basically said the pattern of conduct, the 4 acts, provides strong circumstantial evidence, but the official statements provide the direct evidence needed to clear the high bar for intent. Her final word, and the report's conclusion, was that based on everything they gathered, genocidal intent was the only reasonably inference that can be drawn from the totality of the evidence.
All right, so here's the core tension we need to synthesize for you, the listener. On one hand, you have this incredibly detailed 72-page legal analysis from independent UN-linked experts. It methodically lays out evidence for 4 specific genocidal acts and points to statements from top officials as direct proof of intent. And on the other hand, you have an immediate, absolute political rejection from the government being accused, dismissing the report entirely.
And that clashes the story here in many ways. It's where painstaking legal argument meets political reality head-on. Whatever happens next, whether this leads to anything at the International Criminal Court or the ICJ, or not the very fact that a UN commission conducted this kind of forensic legal analysis and reached this conclusion using the strict definition of genocide. That in itself is a major moment, diplomatically and legally. It sets a precedent.
So for you listening, the key takeaway is understanding these different layers. There's the precise legal definition of genocide. There's the specific evidence the commission gathered to try and meet that definition, those 4 acts, the statements on intent. And then there are the political and diplomatic shockwaves that such a finding creates.
Exactly. Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps, a question for you to mull over. When you're faced with complex legal terms like genocide and intent, and you have an official report laying out detailed evidence, met by an immediate flat denial from a government, how do you, as a critical thinker, approach that? How do you analyze the substance of the claims, the evidence itself, separately from the inevitable political battle over whether the report is legitimate or biased?
A really important challenge. Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.